Software developer job trends in 2025. Are you going to have a job? Am I going to have a job? Let's watch this video take together and find out. As always, I'm going to drop the original video link in the description below. Let's go.
So back in 1995, 1996, we saw the rise of a brand new technology that had a huge, massive impact on software development. Of course, that was the web. Web technologies started hitting. You had JavaScript, Java, you had servers, web servers in 96. You had ASP Classic, as it's called today. Prior to that, you had Perl CGI, then PHP hit the scene, and the rest is history. So what lesson can a modern developer today learn from the lessons of the mid to late 90s in terms of software development careers, in terms of where you should concentrate your efforts? Who made all the money back then?
All right, interesting take so far. I didn't start developing until 2000, so I'm interested to see where this is headed.
I was around back then. I was one of the early adopters of web tech. In fact, that's where I cut my teeth as a developer. I was not a traditional developer. Up until that time, development was pretty much dominated by thick client programming, building apps for Windows, and to a lesser extent for Mac OS and the occasional Linux application. That was development. So the biggest...
I wasn't around developing in the 90s. I started in 2000s. And what's interesting, actually, the web is what brought me into the development. I might have taken a class in high school where I built like HTML page. We used Dreamweaver, I think, back then, or just pure HTML. And then I've noticed some of these sites like YouTube, I could post like a comment and it would update immediately. I was like, how does this work? So I think the first book I picked up was PHP and MySQL for Dummies, and that's where it started for me. But definitely the desktop stuff was not as exciting for me, and the web is what got me started.
The language of the time was VB, VB5, I think 5 and 6. 6 was the last one I know of. And if you were doing small business development, you were doing VB6. So lesson number one.
I've definitely heard of Visual Basic mentioned in enterprise environment from some of the old timers, but never actually touched it myself.
And those developers, the developers who embraced the move into the modern technology, into the web, did very, very well. So for me, back in the day, I was not aspiring to be a developer. I just saw web development, web design as being a superpower to monetize. And in fact, it did very, very well for me. I'm super happy I did. And I only scratched the surface of what people could make in terms of cash and career with web design and development. I did okay. Your Uncle Steph here is not bitching, not moaning, but some people really capitalized on it. So one of the lessons I learned was, number one, jump on the rising tide. Jump on the technology that's gaining the traction now. Don't start becoming a zealot. Like back in those days, you had some Delphi programmers and some VB6 programmers. They were crying and screaming how the new tech, the web, was inferior to what they were doing and how it was a travesty.
Honestly, I don't see a lot of that anymore these days. In fact, I think it's the other way around. Everybody I know wishes their company would move faster and move to the newer stacks going forward. I don't know if that's just like a mindset shift that happened over time or what, but in my experience, this is not happening today.
And in some ways, they were correct. Back in those days, web development was extremely primitive compared to what we do today. It's not even close, not even close. They have modernized web development and web design tremendously, and I'm thankful for it. I remember back in the day, a little anecdote, when the web started becoming a thing and the internet in general, famously, famously Bill Gates said, this web thing, this internet thing, it's just a fad. It's not going to go anywhere. The future is about Windows. He said that. Partly, maybe he didn't have any vision, but also he was economically, he felt obligated to try to kill the internet and the web because Microsoft saw the web as a threat
It just seems so surreal that somebody would have put their bet on desktop applications over the web. Although it's not like one replaced the other, but they just both coexist today. And it's hard to see the world without one or the other today. But I guess hindsight is always 2020.
To Windows. Back in those days, Microsoft was generally a Windows-centric company. Everything came off of Windows. They dominated the entire computing industry because of Windows. And they did a lot to try to prevent people from migrating to web technologies, because web technologies is platform agnostic. You can surf a website and a web app, whether you're on a Windows machine, a Mac machine, or a Linux machine, doesn't really matter. So that's a little side note of history there for you. So what's going on today? Well, today, the new technology, the new web tech, it's not blockchain. As I said years ago when blockchain came out, I said it's going to be a fringe technology. I'm not saying it's no good. I'm just saying it's got such a specialized use case that in the grand scheme of things, not too many people are going to be using blockchain technology. And I've been proven to be correct about that. No. The thing today, the technology of today, the disruptor today, of course, is AI. Number one, AI. Number two, I would say low-code, no-code platforms continue to gain more and more momentum because they're becoming more and more powerful. Things like Airtable, things like, content management systems have been around for ages. Content management systems like WordPress, Drupal.
I still rely on WordPress for my personal blog. I've thought about moving on from that so many times, but the effort of moving off that, given that it's so easy to run a WordPress blog, is just not worth the hours, the effort of converting it to something else. But it's always in the back of my mind. I was like, okay, one day I'm going to move away from WordPress, and it just never happens.
And there are many other low-code, no-code platforms, Wix, Shopify. These are all platforms that you are developing with. So you're not writing any code or you're writing less code, but you're getting a lot more done. Again, as a developer, you should not see that as a threat. Something I've been preaching for years in software development, the top 3 rules of software development. Rule number 1, reuse. Rule number 2, reuse. Rule number 3, reuse. Don't go looking for code to write as a professional developer. Professional developer.
Those are really good rules, but the hand gestures and the camera are tripping me out a little bit.
The first thing you do when you're approached with a project or you have a project to do is to see if somebody else has already built it. That's the first thing you should do. If somebody has already built it, there's a 90% chance that you should leverage that technology because they who have built the software before you have probably figured out a bunch of problems that you're not even aware of, and they solved it in this software. So before you go out looking to build new software from scratch, look to see what else has been built.
The caveat to that if you're trying to build a project or if you're just trying to explore how something works, it's okay to reinvent the wheel and get to the basics and see how things really work. But if you are doing it professionally, then yeah, absolutely, this is definitely correct. I've talked about this a bit before too. If you can find an existing solution to something that already exists, definitely go that route. They have already pre-figured out a lot of things for you.
With that in mind, that tells you something about the way software development continues to grow. It grows to add more and more abstraction layers over what was already built over the previous foundations so that developers become far more productive. I can tell you from personal experience that we are far more productive today. We build much more application today than we used to just in the late 90s, early 2000s, simply because of the languages are much more sophisticated, the frameworks are much more refined and they're more sophisticated. We're just far more productive. For example,
That's also been my experience. I've written some custom content management systems in PHP at some point, again, in like figuring out the auth, figuring out form validation, just even those basic simple things that come already pre-packaged with most frameworks nowadays. That was like days, weeks, sometimes months of work. Today, especially now with AI also being able to write some of the boilerplate code. Something that would have taken me months many years ago would take me days, if not hours, to implement a Django or Laravel or pick your favorite stack. It's much easier now.
Using JavaScript, that is a layer on top of older languages. If you are using Node.js, if you're using Express, again, these are frameworks, these are engines that have been built, so you do not have to build them. React, you're using React. Again, it's a layer of code, when I say a layer, that does a lot of stuff that we used to have to do manually. I remember back in the late 90s, we'd be building software and we would be building authentication systems or pagination systems or charting libraries.
Yeah, pagination is another one. And then writing JavaScript before like jQuery was a thing. I can definitely relate to that. Those things that seem so trivial now because all of these frameworks make it so easy and it comes that way out of the box and you don't have to think about it. You used to have to think about it.
I remember saying to one of my co-developers or fellow developers on a project, I said, this is ridiculous. We're always building authentication systems over and over again. This should be standardized. We're all building database, result set, paginated tables. This should be codified, should be in place. This should not be something we have to build over and over again. Even as simple as a date picker. I remember in 1996, somebody had to build a date picker object.
Pain, I know.
I remember we were shrugging. This is so stupid. This is such a common widget, a common UI widget that everybody should have out of the box. One of the problems we had is because Microsoft was trying to do what it could to put a stopper on these things. Of course, that being said, Microsoft did invent inner HTML, which is fantastic. If you don't know, inner HTML is Microsoft's contribution to being able to drop in HTML code and text at any spot within your document. We're talking HTML pages. This broke the typical DOM syntax, which was quite verbose, relatively speaking. So even though inner HTML was kind of a hack, the Worldwide Consortium, this is the organization that basically sets the standard for the Web Standards Organization, there we go. Anyway, they accepted it, even though it was kind of a hack, but it was so useful. So you got to give kudos to Microsoft for that, number one. Number two, also for creating page-based web apps, which was expressed through active server pages. Everybody adopted that, and that's like what we still do to this day. The page-based paradigm for view implementations on the web. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that's okay. I'm getting a little bit too nerdy here. So there you go. In 2025, developers should be looking at what's cutting edge now. Don't look to the past. Once you get your fundamentals of development under your belt, I recommend the web stack because it's universal, has the most job opportunities as well. Then I would get into, maybe I would learn one back-end framework. So if you're in PHP world, that'd be Laravel. If you're in JavaScript world, that would be Express as an example. Maybe I'd learn the very basics, don't go crazy, of a front-end framework, whether it's something as simple as a Bootstrap or a React or something, or a Vue maybe. My preference is Vue for various reasons.
Personally, I like Django HTMX and Bootstrap. Those are my go-tos for web development nowadays for new projects. But I've been tempted to go back and try Laravel again. I've tried it many years ago, just a little bit. I don't really like writing PHP syntax, even though that's where I started. Sometimes though, if it's just like a one-page app, if it's something that doesn't require too much logic, I will use PHP. I do it for quick things, but for big projects, it's not really my thing anymore.
But where you should be putting your efforts is actually building real things, get paid to learn beyond their foundation. So you learn your foundations and then you build real things. Number two, you should get into AI. Do not ignore AI because you see it as a threat. It is not a threat, it's just a tool set. So jump into AI world, understand it, probably start with GPT, and then, or maybe Grok for coding or whatever one you want. There's several out there. Just become aware of the AI world. Look at different AI models, whether it be GPT, Grok, Gemini, Claude, etc. Just look at them as languages. Look at them as frameworks, and just so that you'll know which ones to use and given the project at hand. I'm not going to make any specific recommendations because the AI space is moving so quickly. So I may recommend X. I may say, okay, today ChatGPT 4.0 is the best and 5.0 will come out. You know what I mean? So today in 2025, late March, yeah, ChatGPT, OpenAI, pretty good. Or a Grok maybe, pretty good. But look around, Also look at good code editors. That's, of course, you got to know that. They got that integrated in there. The coding AI will improve your productivity, no question. You still have to know what you're doing, though. The AI still make mistakes. They call it hallucinations. So you have to have an eye. You have to have that good understanding of fundamentals so you can catch when an AI makes a hallucination.
Sometimes it's really easy because it'll literally just make up an endpoint or something like that, and you just be like, that's not even in a document. Where did you get this? And I say, oh yeah, I'm sorry, you're right, and then we'll do it again with the same thing. Other times it could be a little more tricky, but nonetheless, you still have to understand every single line of code that it writes before you put it in a live environment.
That being said, it can speed up the whole process, not only just writing the code, but researching options, having it summarize things. I use it all the time now, especially when people...
Yeah, it's kind of more useful for that, like reviewing docs, summarizing things, explaining things more than writing code. I find it's okay at writing boilerplate code and maybe spotting a pattern in what you've already written and auto-completing that for you. It's like a very much better, longer auto-completes instead of auto-completing a line or just a variable before it could take the direction you're going and help you out a little bit.
People send me long ass emails. I use it to summarize emails, and so I can I can answer more quickly. It's very efficient that way, and I use it in many other areas as well. So don't embrace the AI. Also look at more traditional abstraction layers like content management systems. Understand a little bit about WordPress. You don't have to be an expert. Just understand where it's used. Understand some of the low code, no code frameworks like the Wixes. Wix is one. Airtable is another. They all have their place. I was on a call a few weeks ago with somebody who has a startup, and I believe it was an iOS game, if I recall. Anyhow, he was telling me that they were able to build their MVP, their very first version of their product, their minimum viable product. They were able to build the MVP in about 3 months rather than over a year. Because of AI. AI just sped up the process. They still had to be developers. They still had to know what they were doing, but they were able to get a lot more things done. This leads me to my last point. AI will make certain jobs obsolete, no question. But at the same time, it's going to provide massive opportunity for people. So number one opportunity, there are going to be new implementations, new types of software that are going to be developed based on AI that did not exist before. So that's going to create a whole new set of jobs, a whole new set of implementations, if you will, that did not exist before. That means a lot more jobs. So those who understand the AI...
In other words, I think what he's trying to say is that AI is taking jobs, not all jobs, some jobs. And so the market is evolving and shifting as we speak due to AI. But in the end of the day, it's still just a tool.
AI space in terms of not necessarily building an AI, but understanding all the different AIs. Again, think of AIs like languages or databases. Think of them as tool sets. Think of them as APIs that you can leverage to do things that you couldn't do before. So it's creating a whole new set of tasks and jobs that software could not do before effectively. So a good friend of mine, I did an interview with him a few weeks ago. His business is basically that. He's creating custom chatbots and other automations for businesses that he could not do without AI. So his whole business is based on implementing these things, and he's doing pretty good. Another advantage that AI brings to the table for people is that it allows smaller developers or smaller teams, smaller companies who don't have the big money to be able to start building the type of applications that they could not build before. So this means, for example, like the aforementioned startup, he's able to get in the game and build a software in 3 months, which would have took him normally a year. This makes him far more competitive. This is actually a risk, or provides more competition rather for the big companies who wouldn't have this small company prior to AI to compete against, which is great. In the end, what this does, it makes software better, it makes software cheaper because of the quick turnaround. Again, you still need to know what you're doing. Developers still need to be well trained, and this is going to be for the foreseeable future. I would imagine at least 5 to 10 years. I could be wrong, but that's my guess. Remember, I'm recording this 25. I think GPT came out 2-3 years ago, and people were saying, "Oh, it's the end of coding." It's not the end of coding. It's just what I had predicted at the very inception of all this has come to pass. We're seeing some of the old jobs be replaced with brand new jobs. So jump on that wave. Don't be like the VB6 programmers back in the 90s. Don't be the traditional thick client application developer back in the 90s. Be the web developers. Get into that game. Get into the AI low code.
He's saying be the web developers as in like in an analogy from the 90s, not necessarily in 2025. I'll probably need to record a whole nother video about this, but being a web developer in 2025 is probably not the safest or the best kind of career path at the moment. It may seem that way on an open internet that everybody is a web developer, but there's definitely a lot more than web development out there. And I think that many of those fields are safer. They're less known, less people are competing for them. When I was going recruiting for one of my companies at career fairs, everybody wanted a job doing like machine learning and AI, but we were actually really looking for a lot of embedded software engineers writing early 2000s C code. I almost never hear somebody say, I want to write outdated C code, but those jobs are out there. This is not to say that they're any better or worse than web development. They're just different.
No code development game. That's where the money is. I'm Uncle Steph. I mentor people in the ways of software development.
That was the end of the video on that topic. He does talk about some other unrelated stuff and the rest of the video, and you can go ahead and watch it yourself if you're interested. The link is in the description below. I'm just going to go down into the comment section and also do some commentary of my own. Overall, I think the video is pretty good. I do like his take. I have experienced kind of very similar things. I did not start developing in the 90s, I started developing in 2000s, but I also did see the shift of frameworks and everything else making things easier to develop and faster to develop. A lot of really nice frameworks that people use today made a lot of challenges of the past obsolete. It's just different now. It transformed. And I saw that transformation happen. And now the new kind of thing on a block is AI, right? And no, it's not taking all jobs, but it is going to take some jobs. It's going to transform how software engineers work going forward. It's an important tool to know. You don't have to get into it and build your own AI or anything like that, just like you're not going to rebuild Visual Studio from the ground up, but you need to understand how to use these tools. That's what he's getting there, and I do agree with that. AI is almost like a combination of different tools that I've used previously. It's like Stack Overflow, Google, and it can answer your questions given the context of your specific problem on a project. And it could edit the code in the editor for you right there. So it like significantly speeds up putting all of those pieces together, right? And it just makes everything faster. Just like frameworks have made development faster by creating an abstraction on top of other tech, this is just another step in a ladder. So I wanted to look at some comments and see if there's anything funny or interesting in here. Future dev trends: carpentry, plumbing, concrete mixing, bricklaying, and roofing. I started in the early 2000s as a career, taught myself Perl and PHP, was able to get a PHP job with no experience professionally. We used Dreamweaver for the log files. Oh man, I remember those days. Actually, I did not learn Perl in the early 2000s. I've learned Perl much later in my career in a professional setting. At one of the jobs that I had, we still had some really old 90s Perl scripts that we had to work with occasionally. I was able to get a PHP job. All code ran remotely on Linux boxes, no VMs that we FTP'd over. Yeah, that's pretty much how it used to be. Need a new server? Someone has to drive to the server cage and set up a new one. No version control, though we did eventually to move to SVN. No GS. This was big. Once I figured out how to use Git, that was a life changer. Like significantly improved my productivity, and everything that Git offers is amazing compared to how it used to be. No JS libraries, no JSON, Flash. I remember learning Flash. I'm glad I did not continue learning it. I'm glad that it's gone. Was big and used for more interactive sites, but most were just a bunch of forms that would post and reload every time. Then script, I can't say that, and prototype became common. The Web 2.0 here became a thing, then jQuery, and now it exploded. It's easier in ways, but there's so many libraries and tools now, it can be overwhelming with picking the right one. Yeah, it was pretty simple. When I was starting out, there are not that many options on a table. Unless you wanted to go much further outside the box, you pretty much learned PHP, some sort of SQL database, and maybe jQuery, or just pure JavaScript. Do yourself a favor and learn SQL and JavaScript. They aren't going anywhere. Throw Python in a mix too if you can. Also learn a bit of DevOps isn't a bad idea. This is just for mostly web, right? Although SQL and Python are in general good idea, JavaScript I would say only if you're going to be doing web. It's definitely not a prerequisite for just about anything else. This one is kind of funny. Rule number 1, don't use Ruby. Rule number 2, don't use Ruby. And rule number 3, don't use Ruby.